free to ask questions at any time here. I
Thank you.
welcome them.
Okay.
All right, so let me get my PowerPoint up. All right, can you see my screen there?
Yes.
All right, great. So thank you for being here to listen today. I'm Ann Braus. I'm the medical director there at Capitol Lakes, the health center. And today I'm finally talking about some good news surrounding the COVID pandemic, and that is that the vaccines are finally arriving. This is a picture that I love. It was the first employee of UW Health who got her vaccine on December 14th, so a couple of weeks ago now. She's a respiratory therapist who has been working on the COVID unit ever since the pandemic started, so a well-earned vaccine. And this is me this morning. I got mine at 11 a.m. I have been anxiously awaiting it. I've been seeing all these pictures of my friends and coworkers getting it and was just waiting with bated breath for the moment they were going to let me schedule mine, and they finally did. So my arm feels fine. I don't feel sore or anything yet, but may get a little achy later. I'll keep you posted on how it goes. So I wanted to take some time today basically to give an overview of some of the general aspects about this vaccine and review some common questions that are coming up, questions that I know I had when I first started learning about it, and then that a lot of my patients have been asking me, and then have some time at the end to chat about it and see what particular questions you may have as well. So the first question is, what are the vaccines that are currently available? And we now have emergency use authorization for 2 vaccines in the United States. These are called mRNA vaccines, and I'll talk a little bit about what that means later. But they are put out by 2 different pharmaceutical companies. One is called Pfizer, and it's a 2-dose vaccine series, and you get them 3 weeks apart from each other. The other one is by a company called Moderna, and it's also 2 doses, and those ones you get 4 weeks apart from each other. And a big question I think on everybody's mind is when is everyone getting these vaccines? You know, we're seeing pictures of healthcare workers, and we're hearing that nursing home residents and staff are getting it, but what is the plan for the rollout of these vaccines? So there's a phased vaccine distribution plan that was sort of put together with advising committees from the federal government, like the CDC, the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, the ACIP, and the state of Wisconsin Public Health. And the goal is to vaccinate those most essential workers and those who are most at risk for severe disease first, because we simply just don't have enough vaccine to give everybody in the country and in the world the vaccine all at once. So as we are producing it and getting it in increments, we're going to try and prioritize kind of the highest need people. So we are currently in what they're calling phase 1A. And so that means that it's now been sort of authorized and is trying to get delivered to frontline healthcare workers, as well as nursing home residents and staff. And this is kind of the general guidance throughout the country and then state by state. So this is what Wisconsin is doing presently. This may extend to assisted livings and staff and residents at assisted livings and other long-term care residential facilities, but we don't have a clear-cut answer on that just yet. My understanding is that it's probably going to take at least a couple of months to get everybody in group 1A vaccinated. And then once that has been generally completed, they're going to move on to phase 1B, which will include everybody over age 75 because they are at high risk for severe disease from COVID, as well as frontline essential workers in the community. So not just healthcare workers, but police, EMS, teachers, public transportation people, daycare providers, et cetera. So trying to get it out to really the most critical workers in our community as well. My guess is that will also take a couple of months to get through. When that's completed, they're going to open it up to phase 1C, which will be everybody age 65 to 74, and then ostensibly everyone age 75 was already vaccinated, so 65 and over for phase 1C. And then other people at high risk for severe disease regardless of their age, so people who may be immunocompromised or have other chronic diseases that put them at higher risk. And then all other essential workers who sort of weren't in the first round there with phase 1B. And then finally, we'll move into phase 2, which will be hopefully everybody over age 16. So again, with an extremely rough estimate, and knowing that it's subject to change, that might be by summertime of 2021. So moving on to some of the big frequently asked questions. The first one is, what can you tell me about mRNA vaccines? And I didn't really know much about these types of vaccines. It's a relatively new technology. I kind of had to go back to my basic science medical school books to remind myself a bit about cell biology and physiology. But a very simplistic view of how these vaccines work is that the COVID-19 mRNA vaccines basically give instructions for our cells in our body to briefly make a harmless version of the COVID spike protein. So we inject in the vaccine, it contains a molecule of mRNA that is kind of the coding instructions for your body's cells to make this protein, which is a spike protein. And the spike protein is found on coronaviruses, but our body does not make it naturally. So when the cells get the instruction to make the spike protein, they kind of receive those instructions. We have ribosomes inside our cells that turn that mRNA into a spike protein, and then they spit it outside the cell, kind of out into your bloodstream. And then your immune system actually recognizes that spike protein and creates antibodies that will destroy any viruses in the future that contain the spike protein, i.e. COVID-19, if those viruses ever enter our body in the future. And what's really important to know is that you cannot get COVID-19 from the mRNA vaccine because we're not actually putting the virus into the body at all. And the mRNA vaccine does not affect or mutate your own body's DNA. This was kind of the question that jumped to my mind when I first started hearing about this was, wait a minute, is this somehow gonna cause mutations in my cells and my body? And the answer is no. The mRNA molecule enters your cell, but only stays in the cytoplasm. It does not enter the nucleus of the cell, kind of the inner sanctum of the cell where your DNA is held, and it does not affect or insert itself into your DNA. So it's not a problem there. It won't cause weird mutations for you. And the mRNA rapidly gets broken down and kind of disintegrated by your cell. I believe it's within hours or a day or so after your cell has produced a few of the spike proteins. So the mRNA does not linger from the vaccine either. Here's a visual aid, just if you're a visual person. And the gist of it is, again, this is kind of what the molecule of mRNA looks like, and this is inside the vaccine. So we inject this into the muscles of your shoulder here. And that causes your cells to create these little spike proteins that get sent out into your bloodstream, where they then get recognized by your immune system, which then creates antibodies to kind of attack anything that has a spike protein on it. So in the future, if the COVID virus ever enters your body, your antibodies will recognize those and destroy those viruses quickly without allowing them to cause illness. So how about the trials? How did they kind of get the data about these vaccines, and what do we know about it, and who was included in the COVID-19 vaccine trials? So this is broken down into the two companies that were making the different mRNA vaccines. The first one was Pfizer. They enrolled over 40,000 people, which is a really incredible number in such a short time. And they wanted to include kind of a racially and ethnically and age diverse population so that it could be representative of the people that we're going to be trying to give this vaccine to really include everybody. So they were able to include 10% of participants were Black and 13% were Hispanic or Latinx. Older adults comprised about 45%, so nearly half were between 56 and 85 years old for the Pfizer study. For the Moderna study, they were able to enroll over 25,000 people, which is still a pretty remarkable number. Kind of similarly diverse group, 10% Black, 20% Hispanic, Latinx, and then about 23% were older adults greater than 65 years old. So they really did try to get a good range of people involved in these studies. And how was the vaccine developed so quickly? I think a lot of folks are nervous about the possible safety efforts, given that this seemed to happen so quickly in the past year. And really the short answer is that this was just a global effort with the world's leading scientists, all focused on a single task. Every country in the world has been enormously impacted by this pandemic. And so everybody wants to put every resource they can into this. So there's an incredible collaboration throughout the world for this, and really kind of unlimited resources. So money, knowledge, manpower, technology, everybody was combining what they could to get the science and the data and the studies through on this. What was also great is that, so many people, citizens have been affected by this. And so they really had a really large pool of diverse adult volunteers step up and volunteer quickly. So they were able, when it often will take 5 or 10 years to recruit 40,000 people for a vaccine study, in this case, they were able to get that number within a few months because so many people were eager to help out and do their part. And so what is an EUA, an emergency use authorization, and what's the safety evaluation process there? So again, kind of to reassure us that they did appropriate safety checks on these. An emergency use authorization for a vaccine is put in place based on the need to use a vaccine quickly to save lives during a public health emergency. And certainly the COVID pandemic is a public health emergency. So the EUA is a shorter process than usual for a vaccine approval, but it doesn't skip any steps in the safety evaluation process. So all of the reviews and everything that would normally take place are still taking place, just in a shorter period of time. The FDA will assess if the vaccine's known and potential benefits outweigh the known and the potential risks. So again, they have a number of professional scientists and evaluators who are coming in to review the data and kind of determine whether they think the benefits outweigh the risks. What was known in this case is that, most side effects for vaccines, any vaccine that exists out there, whether it's tetanus or pneumonia vaccine, most side effects, if they're going to occur, happen within the first few days, and then less than that, they may occur within the first 6 weeks of vaccination. It's extremely rare for vaccine reactions to occur after that period, but in this case, they made sure to evaluate at least 8 weeks of safety monitoring from the studies to make sure that they were sort of covering that period of time and then some, so they were taking some extra precaution there. 2 separate advisory boards also review the data and make recommendations. So apart from the FDA, there's the Vaccine Research and Biologic Product Advisory Committee, I think is what VRBPAC stands for, and then the Advisory Committee for Immunization Practices. So again, we get multiple different groups of oversight for the safety. And so the EUA does not imply that the authorization was done too quickly or that the vaccine is not safe. So again, some added reassurance there. So how effective are the COVID-19 vaccines? This is what has been just mind-blowing. The Pfizer vaccine was shown to be about 95% protective from getting symptomatic COVID-19 infection, and the Moderna vaccine was found very similarly to be about 94.1% protective. This is really remarkable as far as numbers because, the flu vaccine every year is anywhere from like 30 to 60% effective, and we call that good enough and worthwhile. A lot of other vaccines out there, pneumonia vaccines and things are in the range of like 60 to 80%, and we call that good. So the fact that these seem to be, 90+% effective is really remarkable. And what was good is that when they broke it down to look at the different groups of participants from the study, based on race, ethnicity, and age, they found that it retained its high level of efficacy in the 90s. So what kinds of side effects should I expect from the vaccine? And this is something that's really important to consider and know about and be prepared for. You can expect to have some short-term discomfort with this vaccine. I would say you should go into it expecting that you're going to have some mild side effects from this because they were quite common for people. The most common things that people were finding were having some mild fatigue, headache, muscle pain or aches, some chills, low-grade fevers, and pain in their arm at the injection site. Those usually last for about 24 to 48 hours. And interestingly, they're typically more pronounced after your second dose of vaccine compared to the first one that you get. So, if you feel it a little bit the first time, expect you're going to feel it and maybe a little bit more the second time. It's important to know that these side effects actually mean that your body is mounting the immune response that we want it to. So it's telling us that your body is doing its job and it's making those antibodies for you. So tell yourself it's a good thing when you're feeling a little bit crummy after you get this vaccine, that it's worth it because it means it's going to have the effect you want it to. If you need to, you can take some Tylenol to help with the side effects, but again, they should be minor and they usually resolve after a day or two. When and how long will I be protected by the COVID-19 vaccine? So this is where there's some questions still. So both vaccines, like I said, are 2 doses and they're either 3 weeks apart or 4 weeks apart, depending on the vaccine that you get. The protection seems to occur about 1 to 2 weeks after the second dose. So getting to that 95% protection rate, you really have to get the second dose, and then it's going to take another week or two after that before your body has fully mounted that immune response and give you the ability to avoid getting COVID. Unfortunately, we don't yet know how long the protection lasts. The studies are ongoing. We only had data for about 2 months after the vaccine was administered at the point that the data was released and we got the emergency use authorization. And so we are still waiting to see, and they're doing ongoing studies on this. We're hopeful that it may be many months or a year or longer, but we just don't know yet. And so we have to assume that it's not going to be, a really long time at this point. It may be the case that we discover that you're going to need to get boosters of the COVID-19 vaccine in the same way that we have to get the flu shot once a year. Maybe that'll be the case for COVID-19 as well, but time will tell. So do I still need to wear a mask and keep my distance from others after I get the vaccine? And unfortunately, the answer is yes. I know we all are just waiting for life to go back to normal. The vaccine is going to help us get there, but we aren't there yet. My guess is that at least several more months or a year, we're going to have to keep kind of doing this because we really need to get as many people as possible vaccinated, that we're not as safe going out until we have kind of a critical threshold of 60 or 70% of the population that have gotten the vaccine. And again, that's going to take months or maybe the better part of a year. And we also still don't have data on how long the immunity lasts, or whether you can still contract or spread COVID without symptoms after you receive the vaccine. So that's kind of a big sticking point right now. What they were looking at in the studies was people who developed COVID-19 with symptoms. So they felt crummy, which prompted them to get a test and show that they had COVID-19. But people who felt fine weren't getting tested to see if they had it. But what we do know is that COVID-19 can occur in people and cause very mild or even no symptoms at all. And so that wasn't tested as part of this study. So it's possible that you can get the vaccine and it's going to keep you from getting a COVID infection that's going to cause symptoms, but you might still be able to get COVID and also spread it to people with having minimal symptoms. And so from a safety standpoint, we will still have to continue to wear masks and keep our distance until we know more about this. So we need to get as many people as we can vaccinated in the country before we can stop the masking, the physical distancing. So again, I encourage you to get it, and I encourage you to talk to all your friends and family members and help them want to get it as well. Another good question is, should I get the vaccine if I already had COVID-19? And the answer is yes. The recommendations now are to wait until you have recovered from your COVID-19 infection, and then you're good to get the vaccine anytime after, because we do know that it is possible to get COVID more than one time. It doesn't seem to happen within about 3 months of your first COVID infection. So, the CDC says that you can wait up to 90 days after COVID infection to get the vaccine, since you probably have a little immunity during that period of time. However, I would say if you have an opportunity to get the vaccine, get it as soon as you can. It's in limited supply right now, and you may have a rare chance to get it. So if you can, please take it and just go ahead and get that vaccine sooner rather than later. So should anybody not get the vaccine? Who is not allowed to get this? So right now it has not been approved for kids. They have not done any studies in children yet. So one of the vaccines is approved for age 18 and older, and the other one is for age 16 and older. And I can't remember which was Moderna and which was Pfizer, but basically younger than 16 will not be getting it. And I know a big question for a lot of my friends and people I work with is, what about if you are pregnant or if you're breastfeeding? And unfortunately, we don't have a formal recommendation for that yet. The American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists has kind of a non-committal answer in which they say, talk to your provider and decide if the risks outweigh the benefits, if you want to get the vaccine or not, if you're pregnant. So they don't rule it out. The vaccine was not studied on women who were pregnant, but there were women in the study who subsequently got pregnant, in short time after getting the vaccine. And so far, it looks like that's been going fine. But again, we just don't have any formal data yet. So it's really worth talking with your healthcare provider about if or whether you would want to get the vaccine if you are pregnant currently. But the last point here, anybody who has a known severe allergy to any component of the vaccine should not receive it. And so they have a list of the ingredients for each vaccine before you receive it, and you can review that and just make sure that you don't have any known allergies to any components of it. There have been documented case studies of people who have had severe anaphylactic reactions after getting the vaccines. Interestingly, those didn't happen during the studies, but those happened once the vaccine started getting more widely spread to the world, that people started receiving it who weren't in the study. And there have been a few isolated incidences of kind of these severe allergic reactions that they are presuming was related to an ingredient of the vaccine. However, if you have severe allergies to other things like bees or nuts or things like that, it's still very likely safe to get the vaccine. The recommendation is that you get monitored for 30 minutes after the vaccine rather than the usual 15 minutes, but it ought to be safe for you to still get it. So if you have any more questions, now is the time. And here's my email in case you have questions that come up later. I thought this meme was really funny, me watching all the other staff at the hospital get vaccinated. This is how I felt for the last 2 weeks as I was watching everyone else get their vaccines, but finally my day came today. So let's see, I will stop my share here.
Thank you. So we have other people who are without cameras on. Thanks, Victoria. Any questions people have for Dr. Braus?
I just have a quick one regarding whether or not we're going to have EpiPens on site for those of us with severe allergic reactions. And if so, you know, if that's going to be something where we have a nurse kind of monitoring us after receiving the vaccine.
Yep. So we're going to have a meeting tomorrow to talk about kind of the logistics for monitoring and how we're going to implement this. But the general recommendation from, I think it's from CDC, is to make sure you have at least 3 EpiPens on site anywhere you're doing sort of a mass vaccination. And so we will be prepared to have, to have epinephrine available in the unlikely event of an anaphylactic reaction. And then the monitoring process is a 15-minute for the general public, 15 minutes of monitoring afterwards. And then if you have a history of any severe reactions to anything in the past, to do a 30-minute monitoring. So we'll have to figure out the logistics of how we want to do that for staff and for residents, but that is part of the plan.
Okay, cool.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions for Dr. Braus?
One thing I didn't say in this presentation, but I do want to hit home as well, is that it's recommended that you get the same vaccine for both doses. So if you get the Moderna vaccine first, you want to make sure you get the Moderna vaccine for your second one, and then same for Pfizer for both of them. We don't know how well they would work if you were to get one, start with Moderna and get Pfizer second, or vice versa. So the plan, again, for everybody now is to make sure that you are following up with the same type of vaccine for your second dose.
Okay, so if I don't hear any other questions here, if you have one, please unmute yourself. When we know the exact date of our clinic, we'll get all the information out to everyone, and there'll be lots of emails from me just explaining everything and ways that we can try to get scheduled time so we can get everyone in here and go through everything. So we will be ready to go, and we will get all the information out to everyone here when we get it. So I'm excited to do that. It's going to be an exciting day for sure. So I appreciate you joining. Thanks for taking the time and the questions, Victoria and Christy and Peggy and Diana and Kirsty. Thanks for joining us, and thanks, Dr. Braus. Happy New Year, everybody.
Happy New Year.
Bye-bye.
Bye.